For over 3 decades, farmers across Latin America, the Caribbean, and the southern United States have reported attacks on their livestock by something that shouldn't exist. A creature that drains blood from goats, chickens, and sheep, leaving puncture wounds in the neck and completely exsanguinated carcasses. A predator described as hairless, gray-skinned, with protruding spines along its back, oversized fangs, and glowing red eyes that reflect light in the darkness. The legend spread rapidly through Puerto Rico in 1995, then jumped to Mexico, Texas, Chile, and beyond. Witnesses called it El Chupacabra, which means the goat sucker, and insisted it was unlike any known animal. Cryptozoologists proposed it was an undiscovered species, possibly a surviving prehistoric reptile or an extraterrestrial creature. Skeptics dismissed it as mass hysteria, misidentified coyotes, or deliberate hoaxes meant to attract attention. But the attacks continued. Farmers found their animals dead with characteristic wounds. Photographs circulated showing strange hairless creatures that did not match any recognized species. Eventually, specimens were captured, killed, and preserved for scientific analysis. When DNA testing was finally conducted on these creatures using advanced genetic sequencing technology, the results shocked researchers. El Chupacabra was real. It was not a legend, a hoax, or a case of misidentification. The creatures killing livestock and terrifying rural communities were genuine biological entities with measurable DNA, verifiable anatomy, and documentable behavior. But what the DNA revealed was far more disturbing than any cryptozoological legend. El Chupacabra was not an unknown species or an alien visitor. It was something worse, something that revealed what human environmental impact, parasitic disease, and genetic degradation could do to ordinary animals, transforming them into monsters that haunted the landscape like living nightmares. This is the story of how DNA testing solved the El Chupacabra mystery, what the genetic analysis revealed about what these creatures actually are, and why the truth is more horrifying than the legend ever was. The Chupacabra legend began in Puerto Rico in March 1995 when a woman named Madeline Tolentino reported seeing a strange creature near her home in Canovanas. She described it as approximately 4 feet tall, bipedal, with gray hairless skin, large oval eyes, small holes for a nose, and a row of spines or quills running down its back. The creature moved with strange jerking motions, jumped with extraordinary agility, and made hissing sounds unlike any animal she recognized. Within weeks, farmers across Puerto Rico began reporting livestock deaths with unusual characteristics. The animals, primarily goats but also chickens, rabbits, and sheep, were found with small puncture wounds, usually in the neck or chest area, and appeared to have been completely drained of blood. There were no signs of feeding or typical predator behavior. The carcasses were not torn apart or consumed. They were simply empty. The attack spread rapidly. Over 150 animals were reportedly killed in Puerto Rico during 1995 alone. The pattern was consistent across all incidents with puncture wounds, apparent blood loss, no feeding evidence, and occasional sightings of a strange hairless creature fleeing the scene. Farmers who had lived in rural areas for decades insisted they had never seen anything like it. Veterinarians examining the carcasses struggled to explain the apparent blood loss and the lack of typical predation signs. The legend jumped from Puerto Rico to Mexico in 1996, where similar attacks occurred in rural areas. By 1997, reports emerged from Texas, Florida, and other southern states in the United States. By 2000, Chile and other South American countries reported Chupacabra sightings and livestock deaths. The phenomenon had become international, with media coverage amplifying the mystery and generating widespread public fascination. Witness descriptions varied but shared common elements. Most described a creature that was hairless or nearly hairless, with gray, leathery skin, approximately 3 to 4 feet tall when standing, and capable of bipedal movement, although it was often seen on all fours. The creature had large eyes that were sometimes described as glowing red in darkness, and it had prominent fangs or teeth. Witnesses reported seeing spines, quills, or a ridge along the creature's back. The animal moved with unusual speed and agility and made strange sounds, including hissing, screeching, or chittering noises that did not match any known animal. The descriptions were consistent enough to suggest witnesses were seeing something real, but inconsistent enough that cryptozoologists struggled to classify what it might be. Some theories proposed a surviving prehistoric species, or a hybrid creature mixing reptilian and mammalian features. Others suggested an extraterrestrial biological entity, a genetic experiment escaped from a secret laboratory, or even a demonic or supernatural being. Skeptics countered that the Chupacabra was likely just coyotes with severe mange, feral dogs suffering from disease, mass hysteria amplifying ordinary predator attacks, or deliberate hoaxes perpetuated by attention seekers. The debate remained unresolved until specimens could be examined scientifically. The first major breakthrough came in July 2004, when a rancher near San Antonio, Texas, shot and killed a strange hairless animal that had been attacking his livestock. The creature was preserved and examined by mammalogists. It appeared canid, dog-like in basic structure, but with severe abnormalities. The skin was completely hairless, gray-blue in color, and covered in wrinkled folds. The body was emaciated, showing extreme muscle wasting and skeletal prominence. The fangs were overgrown, protruding from the mouth even when closed. The eyes appeared abnormally large relative to the skull. Initial analysis suggested it was a coyote or dog suffering from severe sarcoptic mange, a parasitic skin disease caused by mites that burrow into the skin, causing hair loss, thickening of the skin, and extreme irritation. But the severity of the condition and some anatomical peculiarities made definitive identification difficult without genetic testing. Additional specimens were collected over the following years. In 2007, Phyllis Canyon captured and preserved a creature killed on her ranch in Cuero, Texas. She reported it had been killing her chickens in a manner consistent with Chupacabra attacks, draining blood without consuming the bodies. The specimen showed the same characteristics, with hairless gray skin, an emaciated body, prominent fangs, and anatomical features that seemed slightly wrong for a normal coyote. By 2010, enough specimens had been collected that comprehensive DNA analysis became possible. Researchers extracted DNA from tissue samples and submitted them for genetic sequencing to determine the species, identify genetic abnormalities, and investigate any unusual features that might explain the creature's bizarre appearance and behavior. The DNA results were conclusive and disturbing. The Chupacabra specimens tested were not unknown species. They were not hybrids of different animals. They were not extraterrestrial organisms. They were coyotes, specifically Canis latrans, and in some cases domestic dogs, Canis familiaris, or coyote dog hybrids. But they were coyotes that had undergone severe physiological degradation through parasitic infestation, genetic abnormalities, and environmental stress, changes that transformed them into the monsters described in Chupacabra reports. The primary culprit was sarcoptic mange, caused by the parasitic mite Sarcoptes scabiei. This microscopic parasite burrows into the skin of mammals. It causes intense itching, inflammation, and hair loss. In severe, untreated cases, mange leads to complete hair loss across the entire body and thickening and hardening of the skin, creating a gray, leathery appearance. The disease also triggers secondary bacterial infections that further damage skin and underlying tissue. Mange drains energy as the body fights the infestation, and it produces behavioral changes, including increased aggression and altered hunting patterns. The condition can produce eye infections and irritation that make the eyes look enlarged or to reflect light abnormally. A coyote or dog with advanced mange would appear hairless, gray-skinned, emaciated, and profoundly abnormal, matching the physical description of the Chupacabra almost perfectly. But mange alone did not explain everything. Further DNA analysis revealed additional factors contributing to the creature's monstrous appearance. Some specimens showed genetic markers indicating inbreeding depression, the accumulation of harmful genetic mutations that occurs when populations become isolated and individuals breed with close relatives over multiple generations. Inbreeding depression can cause skeletal abnormalities, including unusual skull proportions, and dental problems such as overgrown or misaligned teeth. It weakens immune systems, making individuals more susceptible to disease. It produces metabolic disorders that affect energy levels and behavior, and it creates developmental abnormalities in body proportions. The combination of mange and genetic abnormalities created animals that looked profoundly wrong. These were coyotes that no longer resembled healthy wild canids, but instead appeared as diseased, malformed creatures that witnesses could not identify. Additional analysis found evidence of chronic malnutrition and environmental stress. Toxicology testing on some specimens detected elevated levels of heavy metals and pesticides, suggesting the animals had been living in contaminated environments and consuming prey exposed to agricultural chemicals. The contamination weakened their immune systems further, making them more vulnerable to parasitic infections and less able to fight off the mange that would transform their appearance so dramatically. The DNA also revealed something unexpected about behavior. Genetic analysis of gut contents and parasite loads showed that many Chupacabra specimens had been suffering from severe anemia, a deficiency in red blood cells that would create intense cravings for iron and protein. Animals with severe anemia might be driven to seek blood as a nutrient source, potentially explaining the blood-draining behavior associated with Chupacabra attacks. Moreover, the metabolic stress from mange, malnutrition, and parasitic infestation would force affected animals to alter their hunting strategies. Unable to pursue healthy prey through normal predation due to weakness and disease, these animals would target easy victims, like confined livestock such as chickens and goats. They might feed primarily on blood and organs rich in nutrients, while lacking the energy to consume muscle tissue. The behavioral changes were not supernatural. They were the desperate survival adaptations of animals dying from disease, starvation, and environmental poisoning. The DNA solved the mystery. The Chupacabra was real. It was real animals transformed into monsters by disease, genetic degradation, and environmental contamination. But this explanation is actually more disturbing than any cryptozoological legend, because it reveals what's happening to wildlife populations in regions where the Chupacabra phenomenon occurs. The clusters of Chupacabra sightings correlate strongly with areas of intensive agriculture using pesticides and herbicides, regions experiencing habitat fragmentation that force wildlife into smaller, isolated populations, places with declining biodiversity and ecosystem collapse, and locations where drought, climate change, or environmental degradation have reduced natural prey availability. The Chupacabra isn't an alien or a prehistoric survivor. It's a symptom of ecological catastrophe. It's what happens when coyote and dog populations become so diseased, so genetically compromised, and so environmentally stressed that they physically transform into the nightmare creatures described in witness reports. The sarcoptic mange epidemic affecting wildlife across the Americas is itself likely exacerbated by environmental factors. Healthy animals with strong immune systems can fight off mange infestations or survive with mild symptoms. But animals weakened by malnutrition, chemical exposure, and genetic problems succumb to severe infections that completely transform their appearance. The inbreeding depression detected in DNA analysis points to population fragmentation. Coyote populations are being cut off from gene flow by highways, urban development, and habitat destruction, forcing breeding between close relatives and accumulating harmful mutations over generations. The heavy metal and pesticide contamination found in tissue samples points to agricultural runoff, industrial pollution, and chemical exposure affecting wildlife across broad regions. These toxins accumulate in predators like coyotes as they consume contaminated prey, leading to neurological damage, immune suppression, and metabolic dysfunction. The Chupacabra is real, and it's a warning. The legend describes a blood-sucking monster that emerges from the darkness to kill livestock. The DNA reveals dying animals, poisoned, diseased, starving, and genetically degraded, forced into desperate predation patterns to survive a few more days before the parasites, the malnutrition, and the accumulated damage finally kill them. Witnesses who encountered these creatures described them as terrifying, unnatural, demonic. They were right to be horrified. But the horror wasn't supernatural, it was biological. It was seeing what industrial agriculture, habitat destruction, chemical contamination, and ecosystem collapse do to wildlife. It was seeing coyotes transformed into dying monsters by the environmental catastrophe humans have created. The spines along the back that witnesses described were likely the prominent vertebrae and ribs of extremely emaciated animals with no fat or muscle to smooth the body contour. The glowing eyes were probably eye infections from mange, causing abnormal light reflection. The jerking, strange movements were neurological damage from parasites, malnutrition, or toxin exposure. The blood-drinking behavior was desperate nutrient-seeking by animals whose bodies were being consumed by disease. Every element of the Chupacabra legend, every terrifying detail from witness reports, has a biological explanation rooted in what environmental degradation does to wildlife. The DNA evidence has been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Multiple studies have confirmed that Chupacabra specimens are mangy coyotes, dogs, or hybrids. Genetic analysis has been replicated across different laboratories using specimens from different regions. The conclusion is scientifically solid and has been accepted by the mainstream zoological and veterinary communities. Yet the Chupacabra legend persists, and attacks continue to be reported. Why? Because the environmental conditions creating Chupacabra-like animals have not been addressed. Mange continues spreading through wildlife populations. Habitat fragmentation continues isolating populations and causing inbreeding. Agricultural chemicals continue contaminating ecosystems. Climate change continues stressing wildlife through drought, temperature extremes, and ecosystem disruption. New Chupacabras continue to be created as more coyotes, dogs, and other canids succumb to the same combination of disease, genetic degradation, and environmental stress that transformed their predecessors into monsters. The DNA solved the mystery of what Chupacabras are. It did not solve the larger mystery of how to stop creating them. Some regions have implemented mange treatment programs, attempting to medicate wild coyote populations to reduce the severity of infestations. These programs have shown limited success. Treating individual animals can alleviate their suffering, but the underlying factors causing widespread mange remain. The parasites continue spreading, and new animals continue becoming infected. Habitat restoration efforts attempting to reconnect fragmented populations and restore genetic diversity face enormous challenges. Wildlife corridors require cooperation across private property, political boundaries, and competing land uses. The infrastructure fragmenting habitats, including roads, cities, and agricultural development, is not easily removed or modified. The economic and political will to prioritize wildlife connectivity over development and agricultural expansion remains limited. Reducing agricultural chemical use and environmental contamination requires systemic changes to farming practices, industrial regulation, and environmental policy that face political and economic resistance. The pesticides and herbicides that contaminate ecosystems and weaken wildlife are also the chemicals that industrial agriculture depends on for productivity and profit. The Chupacabra is a symptom. Treating the symptom by killing or treating individual mangy coyotes does not address the disease. The disease is ecological collapse. That disease is spreading across landscapes wherever human development, industrial agriculture, and environmental degradation push ecosystems beyond their capacity to maintain healthy wildlife populations. The Chupacabra phenomenon provides a case study in how cryptozoological legends can serve as environmental indicators. When people report monsters, when they describe creatures that seem impossible or unnatural, it is worth investigating whether they are actually seeing real animals transformed by environmental stress into something that appears monstrous. Other cryptids, including Bigfoot, Mothman, and the Jersey Devil, might warrant similar investigation. Are some cryptid sightings actually encounters with wildlife suffering from disease, genetic abnormalities, or environmental contamination that makes them appear abnormal enough to generate legendary status? Could some legendary creatures be real animals whose appearance has been so profoundly altered by environmental conditions that witnesses cannot recognize them as familiar species? The Chupacabra teaches us that monsters are real. They are just not supernatural. They are biological responses to environmental catastrophe. They are what happens when we poison ecosystems, fragment habitats, and push wildlife to the breaking point. The monsters emerge not from parallel dimensions or alien worlds, but from the ecological wreckage of our own making. DNA testing revealed the truth. The Chupacabra is real. It's real animals dying horrible deaths from diseases and conditions that our environmental practices have made endemic. It's real predators driven to desperate behavior by starvation and sickness. It's real genetic degradation from population fragmentation and inbreeding. Every Chupacabra sighting is evidence of an ecosystem in crisis. Every livestock attack is a symptom of wildlife populations so compromised by disease and environmental stress that they can no longer hunt successfully and must target easy prey. Every witness who sees a hairless, skeletal, diseased creature and calls it a monster is correctly identifying something monstrous, just not in the way they think. The legend will probably persist because the environmental conditions creating chupacabras are not being resolved. New generations of diseased, malnourished, genetically compromised coyotes and dogs will continue appearing in regions experiencing ecological stress. They will continue exhibiting the characteristics of hairlessness, emaciation, and abnormal behavior that witnesses interpret as evidence of an unknown species. The DNA solved the mystery by revealing an uncomfortable truth. We created the Chupacabra, not through genetic engineering or supernatural ritual, but through habitat destruction, chemical contamination, and ecosystem collapse. We created conditions where normal wildlife species transform into the monsters of legend simply by trying to survive in degraded environments. The Chupacabra is real. The DNA proved it. And the revelation is worse than the legend because it is not about discovering a new species or proving cryptozoologists correct. It is about confronting the biological consequences of environmental catastrophe. It is about seeing what we are doing to the natural world reflected in the dying eyes of animals so diseased, they no longer look like animals at all. It is about recognizing that the monsters are not invading from elsewhere. We are creating them right here through the accumulated impacts of our environmental practices. The Chupacabra legend warned of a blood-sucking monster in the darkness. The DNA revealed something more terrifying: ecosystems so degraded that the wildlife within them becomes monstrous. Populations so compromised that genetic abnormalities and disease become the norm rather than the exception. Environmental contamination so severe that it physically transforms animals into creatures that witnesses cannot recognize. The mystery is solved. The Chupacabra is real. It is real dying wildlife, real genetic degradation, real environmental collapse made visible in the form of hairless, skeletal, diseased predators desperately hunting in the night. And the most horrifying part is not that it exists. It is that we created it. And we are creating more every day as long as the environmental conditions that transform coyotes into monsters remain unaddressed. The DNA finally solved the mystery. The answer is that the Chupacabra is us. It is what our environmental impact looks like when it wears fur and fangs and stumbles through the darkness searching for blood to sustain its failing body for one more night. The legend is real, the monster is real, and we made it.